This episode of Profiles in Risk is sponsored by Insurance Nerds Day. Teaming up with the Gamma Iota Sigma International Conference, Insurance Nerds is proud to host a single-day event. For years, we have dreamed of a different type of insurance conference. A half a day of to-the-point TEDx-style speakers, a half day of learning labs, which will include hands-on skill-building sessions featuring the experts of the insurance ecosystem from many different disciplines, and Insurance Jeopardy, hosted by yours truly. Lots of networking opportunities, and we are even hosting this on a Saturday, so you don't have to lose a vacation day. Insurance Nerds Day will be in Chicago on Saturday, October 6th. The price is only $99. Register now at insurancenerdsday.com. That's insurancenerdsday, one word.com. I hope to see you there. Cue the music.
This is Profiles in Risk. Hosted by Nick Lamparelli. Every week, we interview those who risk life, limb, fortunes, career, and reputation, and those who work behind the scenes who look to protect and enlighten us about risk. You can find the show notes and other insurance-related content at insnerds.com. That's insnerds.com. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Profiles in Risk. I am your host, Nick Lamparelli. On this episode, I am very pleased to introduce John Willemsen. John is the Managing Director, Head of Insurance Programs at Watford Insurance, Watford Specialty Insurance, and Arch Re, and he is based in Morristown, New Jersey. John, welcome to Profiles in Risk.
Nick, thanks so much for having me on. This is a great privilege. Thank you so much.
Oh, I appreciate that. I kind of wish we recorded everything we talked about before we went into the intro, but I have a feeling we're going to tap into a lot of that. What you do overlaps with what I do, and I get so many questions on the Insurance Nerd Slack channels about MGAs and programs and how to get them up and running. It's such a hot topic that I'm excited to have you on to describe what it is you do. So first question I'm going to ask, I'm going to kick it over to you. John, how would you describe what you do?
You know, Nick, that's actually kind of a funny question. I'm really involved in everything. You know, as your listeners can imagine, especially in the early stages of our formation a few years ago, I've been involved in every aspect of program management, from, underwriting, marketing, operations, compliance, accounting, carrier formation, to even fielding calls from insurers looking for help. Luckily for me these days, we have an incredibly talented team to take our business to the next level. It's truly exciting to watch everything come together.
Could you explain for members of the audience that don't fully understand what a program is, how would you define an insurance program?
Program business is really business that is underwritten for a carrier on behalf of a carrier. We delegate underwriting authority to a program administrator. They typically have a broad ability and a great skill set to underwrite specific classes of business and to produce that business as well. And the program marketplace is truly a dynamic one where all of this talent just comes together.
Before I ask my second question, my first one, did you ever think there would be a period in time where MGA's program business would be this attractive? It's always, I wouldn't call it the backwater, but it hasn't really been in prime time. Did you ever think there would be a time where program business would get this much attention?
I've always enjoyed program business. It's been a part of my lengthy career in insurance. At one time, program business was, a four-lettered word. It was not attractive business. And part of the reason for that was really that we didn't have the systems as insurance carriers and reinsurers, and program administrators didn't have the systems as well. And it really came down to monitoring. And at some point in the future, everybody realized, like, oh my gosh, we're actually not doing a very good job at this. But today, it's a much different world. And those program administrators and MGAs that have actually embraced technology and those carriers that are able to monitor program business have been able to keep track, monitor, and ensure profitability as best as possible of these programs.
If a lot of listeners think like me, they may say, well, why can't the insurance companies just do this themselves? Why does there need to be program business? Why can't, the large carriers just create a skunk works in their company and just whatever these programs are doing it, replicate it internally?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In the scheme of things, they probably could, but it really comes down to expenses, right? What I find in the program world is that there is a lot of focus on programs that are specific niches. It may be anything from lawyers, professional liability, nightclubs, contractors, whatever it might be. But the underwriters in each one of those program administrators have spent a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades of experience in just underwriting those classes of business. They have truly become experts in each one of those fields. Whereas on the carrier side, while very talented underwriters as well, they are working with a multitude of classes, everything from a dry cleaner to a retail store up to perhaps a light manufacturer. But that true specialization is really what we look for on the program side, something that I would call outside the box that is not in the traditional marketplace.
Let's go to brass tacks, John. How do you specifically go about evaluating a potential program? What criteria are you using to evaluate something that comes across your desk as a potential program?
Well, the easy answer, Nick, is everything. Program administration, whether you're a carrier or a program administrator, is a complicated and heavily regulated business. When I talk to people about this, it's really like starting a new insurance carrier every time we launch a program, yet without the need to raise additional capital every time we do that. And what we look for in program administrators is probably first and foremost is the reputation of that program administrator, the quality of their data, their underwriting acumen, their ability to actually prove they've been profitable, premium size, and then the potential thereof to be able to grow that business and expand it beyond where they are sitting today. And the one thing that I truly hinge on, and probably the most important to me, is culture. I want to feel confident that we and the program administrator can work together as a team by jointly finding those weaknesses within the program, as well as capitalizing on the strengths of it.
As you're rattling those off, my heart is sinking into my chest because, as all the listeners know, I have my own MGA, and we're creating a program, and we're new, so we don't have we can't check off all the boxes that you rattled off. So what would you say to someone like me or a lot of the insurtechs that are listening, maybe considering doing an MGA? How does someone that doesn't have the reputation, that's just maybe has some kind of underwriting edge that they've developed via their technology, but doesn't have the book or the premium size and is struggling, is still at that perhaps minimum viable product, thinking, I think we could make some hay here, but we need someone to take a chance on us. How would a startup MGA think about preparing themselves, getting themselves ready to approach someone like you for evaluation?
Well, traditionally, within our marketplace here in the program space, startups are difficult at best to try to do because there's no book of business to model. And as you pointed out, you may not even have a reputation, let alone a book of business to really talk about. They truly need a solid business plan, scalable product, strong finances to back the program administrator, and expertise of running an insurance agency. What I find with a lot of startups is conceptually they have a great idea. There are things that are popping in their minds that they really want to try to do and achieve. But I would tell you that some of the pitfalls that some of the folks have on the startup side, particularly on the insurtech side, is that they've never run an insurance agency before, and they truly don't understand the regulatory and compliance side of this, let alone perhaps even billing. There are a lot of nuances, as you know, Nick, within the insurance world that require another level of expertise. We're not just manufacturing widgets here. We're putting out an insurance product that, is heavily regulated, and the world wants to make sure that the consumer is safe.
I almost think it's an afterthought for a lot of these companies in that, hey, we just built this fabulous technology. That's the hard part. So starting an agency, that must be pretty easy. We can, get a consultant or get TPAs. And as you mentioned, it's a lot more difficult than that. I think, even us with a lot of insurance expertise, we're spending in excess of six figures every year just to handle licensing and back office related stuff. And I feel like we're still getting snagged. So I almost, perhaps it's an afterthought for a lot of them. What do you think?
Absolutely. Obviously the conceptual, idea that an insurtech has, or even an established program administrator has, may have some groundwork to it, but it's all of that back room stuff that people just don't appreciate for. You have an idea, you're halfway there. There's another whole part of the process here that really needs to unfold before somebody's going to grant you the pen. And what I have found with a number of startups is that there tends to be things that fall short. Whether it's the financing that's required to get an insurtech off the ground, or is it really a scalable product? Do we want to truly issue thousands and thousands of policies and have, $1 million of premium? It's just not worth it to a carrier to really kind of go through that process. So everything has to be able to jive. And then folks certainly like myself and others within our industry, I have looked at, I don't know how many it is, but certainly over 1,000 program submissions. I can sniff through these things pretty quickly and, ascertain where the weaknesses are lying. It's kind of like a Shark Tank, pardon the borrowing of the name, but it really is similar to that, where we have seen so many opportunities in our past that we recognize pretty quickly where the weaknesses are. And it's up to that program administrator presenting that idea to be able to overcome those. And we often will have folks come in, talk to us about a concept and idea, and it sounds really great. And we identify a couple of areas that need some more work, and they come back and either they're able to get through that or they don't. And I think a lot of insurtech opportunities will probably not make it through the process. And that's even true for program administrators that are already established. They come through and they want to start a new line of business, but they don't have the expertise. They don't have anything. The real test here, right, is being able to prove your concept to folks that have looked at so many submissions in their lifetime and be able to, just sell that, not just present a concept and think everybody's going to be happy about it. You really have to know your stuff. You really have to know it.
Another issue that a lot of newbies coming in to the space don't appreciate is the timeline. So you had mentioned going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Could you verbally describe what the timeline for getting an MGA off the ground, getting capacity, going live, what's that timeline look like?
So I look at the program administration marketplace as truly relationship driven. These are relationships that I've had over years that eventually, come to something. So that relationship part maybe take a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years in just establishing a relationship with a carrier and being able to talk to them frankly and having good conversations. But let's just fast forward through that and assume you've gotten through that relationship component. The timeline on launching an insurance product is much slower than any of us would probably want. We would love to be able to flip a switch and say, oh, you're up and running and everything is great. But the reality is that particularly on admitted business, it takes a much longer process. Everything is ready to go. All the nuts and bolts are there. You've got everything done. Data is good. Everything is working. It'll take at least probably 3 to 9 months, depending upon the states and the complexity of the filing process you're about to go to. Non-admitted paper is much faster. fastest one I think we've ever done is probably about 30 days. But that was one that was easy, one line of business. We had the data, everything was good, and you launched. You're not necessarily concerned about, you're always concerned about regulatory issues, right, and compliance issues. But it's a much easier process. The filing, there is no real filing process to undergo. But when you take a step back, when you look at our marketplace, or at least the marketplace that I play in, if you will, 75% of the business that we do is admitted paper, 25% is non-admitted paper. And so that means that 3/4 of the time I'm spending in, working with the compliance folks and working through regulatory and departments of insurance and filings. It's a much longer, much more strenuous process to go through. Departments of insurance, at the end of the day, are really there to protect the consumer, and they want to make sure that that's going on, and they don't want any bad practices going on. So some states are more difficult to get through than others, but really it's really a 3 to 9 month process. And if you have something that's completely outside the box that you're trying to get approved, or something that's a little bit more radical, it could take a year, and sometimes I've heard of even more, to try to get a product to marketplace.
Which gets back to what you described as might have been one of the first bullet points, which is financing. For a new company, they need to survive. They need to have enough cash on hand while they're twiddling their thumbs waiting for regulatory approval of their rates or forms. They need to survive. And I just don't, a lot of the insurtechs that are coming in, I don't think have thought about that. They're just thinking once they get to the start line, the gun goes off and they just start sprinting, when they're actually like a true marathon. They're actually like in the back of the pack. So when the gun goes off, they have to bide their time to get to the starting line, and they could run out of money. So, could you just briefly talk about financing and, your opinions about how well a program or an MGA should be capitalized for them to be able to handle these delays?
Yeah, I think that, particularly I think we can focus here on probably insurtech business, if you will. It is a long process. So if you're just starting out from scratch, it's going to take you, my guess is, a minimum of 6 months to even conceptualize what it is that you're doing. And then from there, then you've got to do the rounds with the carriers and the reinsurers. You can add another 3 to 6 months on top of that. And then you've got to convince someone that it's going to work. You're really looking at probably a 2-year timeline from an insurtech startup to really get a product out to marketplace and launch. So whatever your expenses are, you really need to consider that this is a long process. It's not going to go over easily, and it's going to take probably a couple of years really to get to marketplace.
And for a lot of lines, since it's tech oriented, it might be different. The timeline could extend out. With the expenses, it could be in excess of 7 figures, right?
Absolutely. And once you start throwing the technology at everything, we all recognize that technology is rarely under 6 digits, right? So it becomes extremely expensive, and you just start burning through that cash pretty quickly.
For what I do with catastrophes, it's I don't think you can get a single catastrophe model license for less than 6 figures. So as a firm, we're a company that's very tech oriented, and we're very focused on providing ensemble model view. That's a very hefty expense, and as we're going into it, it becomes clear, wow, this thing's going to get to 7 figures pretty quickly. So you have to be financed. So for anyone that's listening, John laid out the timeline, but that you have to be capitalized to be able to withstand that. So John, the reason why I reached out to you is because you published something on LinkedIn. There've been a lot of articles. I've had podcasts on programs and the thought process to get one started. But you published the first article that actually talked about, okay, the program's up and running. How do you measure its success? How do you follow through on it? How do you know if the program is actually achieving what it's supposed to be achieving? And if it's not, what do you have to do? I'd like to spend a little time talking about that and what you wrote about in that article. Let's assume the program's up and running and the product is live and it's in the market. Then what do you, how are you measuring the success of that particular program?
So there's a lot of different tools and techniques, I guess, that we use in the program world to make sure that a program remains profitable. And I like to say that what some program administrators don't realize is that this relationship that we have, carrier and program administrator, is, this is kind of the goose that lays the golden egg. And if you can protect that, you will have a long-term sustainable program. Look, I've heard of a lot of great stories and certainly a lot of bad stories about how those relationships go bad. But if your listeners can kind of take into account a few items that I would probably relate to them as far as maintaining a program on a day-to-day basis, it's really kind of this. It comes down to, first and foremost, is that somewhat daily interaction between the carrier and the program administrator. And what I mean by that is that we at Watford and R3, we design the underwriting box, if you will, the underwriting guidelines, to kind of create about 10% of that book is a referral, meaning that we want to see referrals. We want to talk to you. We want to make sure that, first of all, we are answering your needs, but, obviously we're all in this to make money as well, but that you're also answering ours. It is a great way for us to keep a finger on the pulse of a program. And it can be extremely demanding. And I've heard horror stories about the referral process. Something kicks outside the guidelines and it comes into the carrier. And some carriers may take a week, 2 weeks to get back. I mean, I always stress 24-hour turnaround time. And most of the time we're much less than that. It's usually same day, within the same business day. And that is a huge help, of course, to any program administrator out there. But recognizing that that's a way that we communicate without just calling up each other and saying, hello, let's just talk about the business that you're actually doing. And, a big thing that I'm always a big proponent of is monitoring rate change. Without monitoring rate change, and let me just back up. So rate change really is monitoring, premium minus exposure change, so that what we had last year as a rate, let's say it was $1, and we have actuarially gone into your book of business and we think that you need another 5% of rate change, that rate will now be $1.05 for business going forward. If you're not monitoring that component, which is a very basic but very essential piece of monitoring a program, you have no idea where you're steering the ship. A lot of underwriters that are program administrator, or let alone a carrier, I mean, it's all the same across the book, right? They are working on account 1, account 2, account 3. They're working on a daily basis on accounts. But what we do from the carrier side or reinsurer side is we take a step way back, 40,000 feet, and we look in. And we're not necessarily, we're obviously concerned about that individual account, but what we are also doing is monitoring the book of business. If you're not monitoring that book of business, you have no idea where you're steering your ship. You could be driving it right in the ground. You could be asking for too much. Maybe you're hitting too much rate and you're shedding off the book. A lot of the good business is going out the back door, and the bad business, if you will, is staying behind. It's truly a critical component, and I don't want to call it a science by any stretch of the imagination, but I think it's part of the art of managing a program. I also think that doing underwriting and operational audits, we do those a couple of times a year, especially when a program first launches. We want to make sure we completely understand what that program administrator is doing, both operationally and underwriting, just to make sure that, the deal that we all thought we signed on to, and quite frankly, this comes back the other way too. The program administrator wants to make sure that everything we've asked for, we're doing, and vice versa. It's about just that constant communication back and forth. And, through that process, we identify underwriting strengths and weaknesses, operational strengths and weaknesses, and then we try to fix those or capitalize on those. And by doing all of those kind of things just on a day-to-day basis or a couple of times a year, it's really a great way of monitoring how the health of the program will be. And the better that communication, the better the program will probably be.
What gets programs into trouble?
Well, it could be a lot of things.
Well, what are the big ones? What are the big reasons?
Well, yeah, no, the big ones are, I think, first, I would say, suddenly, for whatever reason, and I'll probably get into maybe more of those kind of details here, but the discipline and risk selection deteriorates. You have a book all performing at X level, and now for whatever reason, because of increased competition or whatever it might be, is forcing you as a program administrator to take accounts on that maybe you wouldn't have taken on in the past. And it may seem, again, kind of going back to that 40,000 foot view, everybody's underwriting one account at a time, and they don't see that deterioration of risk selection as it comes across a book of business as they continue to go down the road. Whereas a good program administrator, a good carrier takes a step back and goes, oh, wait a minute, we see a problem coming down the path here, let's try to fix that. And so it's just a constant balance with market share and profitability and making sure that you're not taking risks that you really would have never taken on before. I also find that sometimes, particularly on perhaps newer programs or folks that may not have been in this business a long time, they have a tendency to want big limits and they have no premium. And I think it's pretty easy to understand that if I've got $1 million of premium in a program or $5 million of program, but I'm offering limits of $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, the second we have a pop, everybody's sitting around the table looking at each other, wondering why we did the deal. I would urge many program administrators, particularly in the common lines of business, if you will, the property, or not necessarily property, but GL, professional liability, to really kind of take a step back and say, look, from this program carrier, we want $1 million. Can we get excess insurance placed elsewhere? Some carriers and reinsurers do that well. We have the ability to reinsure things over $1 million, so we can help spread out that risk, share that risk. Obviously, we're making less money, but at the end of the day, we're helping that program maintain some sense of balance between limit and premium. And then I think there are also other things that happen. If a program administrator expands into a line of business that they don't have the expertise in, but they think it's a necessary component of what they do, they can get into trouble when they treat it like a bolt-on. So, like a good example might be, I've got a general liability-based program, and now I want to add workers' comp. Not an unusual request and not an unfair request. But if you treat the workers' comp like a bolt-on product and it's just slap a premium on it and go, then I guarantee you're probably heading for trouble. You need to have that same level of expertise in that core line of business that you started with, as well as with those bolt-ons. Some are less tenuous than others, right? But when it comes to like workers' comp or umbrella limits, whatever it might be, those are the kind of things that I think can truly get a program administrator in trouble. And that goes the other way too. You see carriers that may not even understand the line of business that they're getting into from the perspective of deploying the pen to a program administrator. So it's a constant battle that everybody might have in that marketplace. And then I think that, unidentified changes in a marketplace that happen. There could be shrinking or expanding marketplaces that are going on. The market share is decreasing, it's increasing. And that can dramatically increase competition. If there's less to feed on, if you will, people are going after it even harder. If there's more to feed on, that means there's probably more competition in the marketplace. And again, everybody starts throwing, decreased premiums at it. So it's really kind of like keeping that balance and making sure that everything is good for the long run. And then I probably would add expanding into states that they may not realize that there's a problem in. Certain lines of business have certain problems in particular states, whether that might be, auto liability, for instance, or it could be some states are more prone to wind or hail. The carrier and the program administrator really need to understand what exposures are being added to that book of business as they go forward and expand. And I think that those are probably some of the more basic things that can happen to a program.
That explains a lot. And as you were running down that list, I kept thinking that these programs, as they expand, should almost think of their expansion as like a new program in a way, even if it is a bolt-on, in that they should probably bring the same level of expertise to the bolt-on that they did to the original program, which means if it, in your example, the GL and add in workers' comp, they should probably create a workers' comp team where there's an expertise and they can handle all of the specifics, and they'll know, like, oh, California is a very expensive state and getting worse, but also all of the other stuff with pricing and everything else. Would that make sense for a program to make? Is that part of it? Just making sure that there's the appropriate level of underwriting and technical expertise on the team, regardless of what they're underwriting.
Absolutely. Again, going back to kind of that golden goose theory, whether you look at yourself as the program administrator as the golden goose, or you look at yourself as a carrier as the golden goose, you need to protect both. And that same effort that's been deployed on that core line of business that someone has been writing for 10 years or whatever it might be, needs to be applied to that next line of business that they're going to get themselves into. Hire an experienced underwriter, an experienced team, whatever it might be. Make sure that people that are about to embark on that new line of business truly understand not only that line, but the risks that you're writing. If you are in the trucking business, whatever it might be, let's say, but if you're in the trucking business, you should have a workers' comp underwriter that understands trucking business. If they were a GL underwriter or a workers' comp underwriter, for that matter, that handled retail business, then it's different, right? It's apples and oranges, and you will create issues down the road. You may not see them right away, but at some point in time, they will surface.
Have you? What's your experience with programs that have been performing poorly and reversing course? Do you ever see that, or is it just pretty much the case where when programs begin performing poorly, they kind of keep going in that direction?
No, I've seen a number of really good success stories along the way. And sometimes, like anything else in life, maybe you have to hit the bottom. You have to, ride your book way down, and then suddenly you realize that everything is just going out the back door. And it's at that point in time when, that decision is made as to what to do going forward. Do you take a step and just, maybe turn into an insurance agent and place it with a bunch of carriers and go that direction? And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you truly enjoy and love the space that we call program administration, then what you need to do is buckle up, have open and honest conversations with the carrier, make sure we all understand each other, right? And then get to the core of the problem. Try to make sure you understand, what's going on within your marketplace, what's going on within that pricing, and then set kind of a plan and action that will help deliver those results. And you don't just set that today and then forget about it. It's about doing that constantly, having that constant communication back and forth, and really trying to get to the science of all of that, really trying to finesse your products through the marketplace and growing it steadily. A lot of scary things happen when books of business grow rapidly, but what you're really looking to do is to grow it steadily and make sure you understand it. You're not changing a lot of things going on within the program itself, but making sure you understand that original premise, the problem that you've identified, and trying to fix that and go forward. A lot of folks may not recognize this, but one thing that I'm always looking for are underwriting guidelines. So when you look at underwriting guidelines, so I've seen, again, way too many underwriting guidelines in my lifetime, but underwriting guidelines, if they're constantly changed, what you begin to realize is that what you're doing with your underwriting guidelines is messing with your loss pick as well. Underwriting guidelines are really kind of the skeleton of what you do, right? So every time I change my underwriting guidelines, I'm changing a dial. And if I don't know what those dials do as I move through changes within my underwriting guidelines, I'm losing touch with the book of business I started with. Sometimes that's obviously a necessary evil to bring it back. But if you truly want to understand what's going on in your book, you should maintain a heavy discipline within those underwriting guidelines, because that sets the box, that sets the parameters of what your book is going to look like. And as you begin to truly study and philosophize really about what your book of business is, you can start turning those dials to start changing things to increase production, decrease loss. But if you're constantly changing guidelines, or you think you're sitting at a 60 loss ratio right now, but you want to add, a ton of coverage to it, you're ultimately changing your loss peg. Your 60 can go to a 70, in a matter of months. So it's really a matter of understanding everything that you're doing to that program as you progress.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I'm always wary of, I'm hearing of these companies that are growing incredibly rapidly, and I think history has been very unkind in insurance to companies that have grown that rapidly. They can't manage their expenses. It's usually not a good sign. What would you say to a company that is growing rapidly? That's they've done everything they needed to do. There's a lot of demand. Even if they're getting their price, why would you warn them about growing rapidly? It seems counterintuitive.
Well, growing rapidly is great, right? Everybody's making a lot of money, certainly to start with, but it's truly understanding what that book of business is about. And it's about understanding the risk selection and the pricing of that book as it moves forward. If you're growing so rapidly, first of all, I would say that at first blush that maybe you're too cheap and that's why you're growing so rapidly. Or it could be that you have this great product in the marketplace, it's priced fairly, and maybe there is nothing wrong. But if you think that your product offering is similar, but let's say less expensive than everyone else, and then that's why you're growing so rapidly, then you better have another angle here as far as being able to manage that book as it continues to grow. Otherwise, this is going to be a train wreck at probably some point in time. You're really not going to understand what you've done until it's too late. 3 years from now, the loss ratio is going to be over 100, and it's too late. The program administrator is scratching their head, the carrier is scratching their head, and there's no way back. And that kind of goes back to some of those conversations with managing the program, like truly on a day-to-day basis, managing your rate change, managing your underwriting guidelines, and making sure that you truly understand what's going on within that book. One thing that I always urge program administrators to do is to hire their own independent actuary. Whether they do it internally, they hire an actuary as part of the firm itself, or they go out and secure the services of an appropriate or a well-known vendor that can do those services for them. This way you have, let's say an unbiased person looking at your program and your book of business that can actually give you insight as to potentially what's going on. They may not understand the true mechanics and the underwriting of it, but they can tell you that based upon the path that you're going, you're heading for trouble or you're doing an awesome job in what you're doing. And then compare those notes along with what the carrier is telling you. If we all agree within a couple of points as to what that loss pick might be, and I think we're all in pretty good shape here, right? But if we're telling you it's X and you're 10 points different, that's a huge problem coming. Often in this program space, as in probably a lot of insurance, we are, fighting for 2 points of profitability on a program. So it's important to always make sure that that's well maintained and understood.
What types of programs do you think will be hot in like the next 5 years? Let me rephrase that. That's the wrong way to ask that question. What's the trend with programs? Where are we going with this? And where do you think we'll be like 5 or 10 years from now? Do you think your job will be dramatically different?
No, I would tell you that it probably becomes perhaps a little bit easier. I think as certainly the program market continues to expand, there are numbers out there that kind of vary somewhat wildly, but let's just call it $37 billion of program business out there, a couple of thousand program administrators, 2,000 programs, 1,000 program administrators out there. As time goes by, we as an industry become more and more sophisticated. As we become more and more sophisticated, we're able to price risk more appropriately. So those programs and carriers, for that matter, that can see that coming and adapt to the ability to truly monitor all of these programs as we go forward, will probably be ahead of the pack. And I think it becomes more specialized. Carriers are going to look to program administrators to handle the more specialized lines. They're going to handle the things that truly require an underwriter's touch. I think we can all see, obviously, in the personal line space where we've somewhat commoditized that marketplace, right? It's all online. It's easy to do. I can buy my homeowners, my car insurance, my umbrella, whatever it might be. I can do all of that online. The commercial space is certainly getting there, and it will get there. And there will be, obviously, points in time where there will be leaps made in that space. Right now, it's a bit more difficult, particularly on a multi-line type of account. But those monoline accounts, if you're specializing in a space that's, let's say, under $5,000 a premium, and if you truly look at that application, you can think that a computer can underwrite it, then you're in trouble already. What you really need to do is get away from that. That doesn't mean run away, but that means you need to transition from becoming that somewhat generalist, if you will, to becoming much more specialized, really understanding those kinds of exposures and risks that require a certain level of underwriting acumen that's not being handled by the traditional market. If you go online and you find dozens of competitors against what you're doing, that means everybody else is watching it. The insurtechs are watching, and they're saying, hey, we can come in, take a lot of market share, and go. And we can do that, in theory, less expensive. But those folks that truly look towards that specialization, getting to know what their risks are about, and it's not necessarily computerized, they can probably do well for a number of years coming.
John, is there, what would you recommend for listeners that want to learn more about program business? Are there any reading materials or sites that you think could be valuable for them?
I look at this as kind of somewhat of a blessing in disguise, right? This is part of the barrier to entry to program business. There really aren't any books out there, per se, that specifically discuss this. There are probably some, association published type of publications that are out there, but really at the end of the day, there's no real manual on how to do this. I would suggest that most people take a look at Target Markets Program Association. They are probably the preeminent program association out there. They cater to program administrators. And then carriers like I go in and we talk to program administrators during conferences. We provide, educational sessions, whatever it might be. And that to me seems some of the best way to go about that. I mean, other than, someone like myself, I really believe in trying to promote the health of the industry. So I'm I always strive every day to try to help someone or guide someone. So if any of your listeners just want to chat, I'm not looking for a benefit out of it. I learn something out of every day anyway. So what I'm saying to you is that talk to people, call me, call anyone else in this world, and get an opinion as to what to do next, and try it that way. But I probably can't point them to any single publication that would help them. There are a lot of studies out there, but that's not going to help you get into program administration.
Yeah, that's completely coincidental, because the podcast that we released today was with David Wright, who's a reinsurance broker at Beach and Associates. And I asked him, how does one become a reinsurance broker? And he basically said there's really no way to become a reinsurance broker except to just become a reinsurance broker. Like, getting through the minefield is the hurdle that you have to get through. And just if you can get through it and contact the right people, you can become a reinsurance broker. But there's it sounds like it's very similar with program administration. You just gotta pick up the phone and do your research and do your homework. Hell, that's what we had to do. So I didn't know if there were any other shortcuts. And we did just become a member of Target Market. So I'm very much looking forward to participating in that specialty group. So that'll be fun.
That's great. Good for you. Yeah, I've been on the board of directors of Target Markets, and I'm currently on the carrier committee now. I've retired from the board, if you will. But it's a very active association. It really helps a lot of program administrators do the right thing, and it helps carriers as well to do the right thing and make sure that we're all promoting the health of the industry.
Yeah. John, this is part of the podcast where we transition to the personal side of things, so that the audience can find out who is John. And so the question I ask all of my guests are, if you weren't working, what do you, or when you aren't working, what do you enjoy doing?
So I'm pretty much a outdoorsy kind of guy. So I love being outdoors, whether it's backpacking or whatever it might be, hanging with the family and friends. And I'm also known to tip back a very nice IPA on a nice summer day.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And not necessarily in that order.
Good for you. John, what tools or techniques do you use to stay productive and or organized?
I think that, first and foremost, it's the team that I work with. I know that may sound a little bit, flashy or whatever you might want to call it, but it's really about having a good team that's behind you to help make everything go well and transition things, fix any issues that pop up. But I would tell you that one of my main sources of sanity in this crazy little program world that we live in is really just using I have a mini CRM. Helps keep me focused on important tasks each day that I need to accomplish. It's not necessarily a perfect science, but it really does work. And I tend to lean towards more of the computer than I do a piece of paper. So it's easier for me to work that way. But I would urge everyone to, obviously, what are the top 5 things we need to accomplish today? And let's get those done and then focus on the other things. And it's a never shifting balance, right, of priorities. But if you can at least try to remain as focused as possible, I would tell you that that's certainly a ticket to success.
Got it. John, what books have you found influential in your business and or personal lives? Anything stick out?
A couple. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, Tipping Point. Another interesting one I read not that long ago, I can't even actually say the title, if you will, on air, but it's The Subtle Art of Not Giving an F by Mark Manson, I believe it is. It's a very interesting book, and it's a way of kind of looking at things a little bit in reverse. I would urge a lot of listeners to take a look at that, as well as perhaps the Purple Cow by Seth Godin.
Oh, I love that.
And while I wouldn't recommend everybody heavily reading The Art of War, I think it's also an interesting book to read. It's somewhat simplistic and yet extremely complicated, but I think The Art of War is an interesting read as well.
You might be the first person that's recommended that book or brought it up. But that's like, I hear that a lot on other podcasts. Everyone, it's almost like a badge. You have to say the Art of War. You might have been the first person to bring it up in Profiles and Risks. So I have a copy. I've honestly, I've never read it.
I think there are different lessons to be learned. Obviously, reading the book, it's easy and yet complicated. It's an interesting read, but it just kind of takes some lessons from it is the way I would have listeners take a peek at that.
Got it. I will put all of those on the show notes. John, I was educated. That's always a pleasure when I can have a guest on and get a lot out of it. And so it was fantastic having you on. I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did too. And I will put your LinkedIn connection on the show notes as well, so people can find you. So it was an honor having you on the show.
Nick, thanks so much for having me on. Yeah, I've actually, part of the reason why you found me to begin with, I've just started publishing, tips for program administrators to really think about, on my LinkedIn site. So every couple of weeks, I plan on putting something out. I've got 20 subjects already that I'm pretty much ready to do. So it'll be a while maybe before I run out of ideas, but I would urge anyone interested in the program space to just take a look at that. If there's any interest or anybody has any questions whatsoever, please always feel free to call me. I don't care if you're going to roll your book to me or not. Just give me a call.
Awesome. I learned a ton. So, John, thanks for coming on Profiles and Risk.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.